How do you know the exact moment your life quietly begins to change? That question echoed in Claire's mind as she stood outside her office building, holding her bag a little tighter than usual. The evening air in downtown Portland felt heavier, as if the day had been carrying something she hadn't noticed until now. She wasn't waiting for anything special, just a rideshare, just a simple drive home, just another ending to another ordinary day. But ordinary days sometimes hide turning points. What if the smallest moment is actually the start of everything? The thought drifted through her mind right before a silver sedan pulled up to the curb. The headlights softened as the car stopped, and Claire stepped forward automatically, expecting the same anonymous ride she'd taken hundreds of times. But the moment the driver lowered his window, something in her paused. "Claire," the man asked with a warm, steady voice. She nodded, surprised to hear her name spoken with such calmness. "Great," he said with an easy smile. "I'm Daniel. Hop in." His voice was soft, but not weak. Kind, but not forced. Claire settled into the back seat, expecting silence. Instead, Daniel glanced at her through the mirror with a gentle curiosity. "Long day?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. A long week, actually." Daniel smiled lightly. "I hear that a lot. But you look like someone who's carrying more than just work stress." His words were simple. Not intrusive. Not dramatic. But for some reason, Claire felt them settle into the cracks she'd been ignoring. They spoke in small pieces: her job at a marketing firm, his part-time driving while finishing a tech course, the strange weather that kept shifting from rain to sunshine. None of the topics were deep, yet the conversation felt smoother than anything she had shared at home in months, and that realization startled her. When they reached her street, Daniel slowed the car gently. Before she stepped out, he said something unexpected. "Take care of yourself, Claire. You seem tired, not defeated. There's a difference." She froze for a moment, not because the words were romantic, but because they were true. Because she hadn't heard something that honest, or that kind, in a long time. She thanked him quietly and walked toward her house, a house that looked peaceful from the outside but felt hollow inside. The living room lights glowed softly as she entered. Her husband, Ethan, sat at his desk, typing rapidly, barely looking up. "You're home," he said without tone, without warmth. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge." Claire nodded, placing her bag down. She waited for him to ask about her day, or notice her silence, or just look at her long enough to see she wasn't okay. But Ethan only kept typing, his eyes glued to the screen like she wasn't even there. Dinner was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, not comfortable. The kind of quiet that makes a person question how two people living in the same house could feel so far apart. Later, as Claire showered, she caught her reflection in the mirror, a tired version of herself she wished she could understand better. Why did a 10-minute ride with a stranger feel more human than an entire evening with her own husband? She wrapped a towel around her shoulders and sat on the bed, scrolling through her phone, trying not to think too much. But her mind kept drifting back to the ride. Not because of Daniel, but because of herself. Because she had felt, noticed. And that feeling scared her. She lay down beside Ethan, leaving a careful distance so she wouldn't disturb him. He didn't reach for her. She didn't reach for him. They just lay there, two bodies in the same room with two hearts drifting in different directions. Around midnight, Claire stared at the ceiling and wondered when love had quietly turned into habit. She didn't want to feel this way. She didn't want to feel like she was waking up next to a stranger. She didn't want to feel drawn to a moment that wasn't supposed to matter, but she couldn't shake the sense that life had shifted, even if only slightly. And deep inside, she feared that ignoring the shift might eventually break something she wasn't ready to lose. The next morning came too quickly. Claire forced a smile as she made coffee, hoping Ethan would join her. He walked into the kitchen, moving mechanically, grabbing his to-go cup. "I'm running late," he said. "We'll talk later." Talk later about what? He didn't specify. He didn't notice how quiet she was. He didn't notice how she stood there, waiting for some sign of connection. Instead, Ethan kissed her forehead lightly, soft, absent, routine, and rushed out the door. Claire stood there in the stillness of the kitchen, staring at the empty space he left behind. She wasn't angry. Just tired. Tired of waiting for something that used to be effortless. Her car was still at the mechanic's, so she booked another ride. She didn't think about who the driver would be. She didn't expect anything unusual. She didn't think anything could happen that could make her already fragile emotions feel any different, but when the app showed the driver's name, her breath caught for a second. Daniel, the same driver from yesterday, the same warm voice, the same effortless kindness. Coincidence? Maybe, but the timing felt strange, almost like life was nudging her toward a path she didn't ask for, yet couldn't ignore. She stood outside, waiting, feeling something she couldn't name: uncertainty, curiosity, fear. Maybe all three. The silver sedan turned the corner again, approaching her street with the same gentle speed as before. As the car slowed to a stop, Claire felt the smallest shift in her heartbeat. She wasn't planning anything, she wasn't imagining anything. She simply felt different. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the next few minutes would pull her into a direction she had never expected to face. What if the person who understands you the most isn't the one waiting at home? That question pressed against Claire's chest the moment she stepped toward the silver sedan again. The air felt different today, not colder, not warmer, just heavier with possibilities she couldn't name. As she opened the door, her heartbeat rushed for reasons she told herself weren't real. Why do small moments feel dangerous when your heart is already fragile? Daniel glanced back with a familiar warmth. Good morning, Claire. Her name sounded softer in his voice today. Or maybe she was simply noticing too much. She slid into the back seat and quietly buckled in. You look less tired, he said gently. Claire let out a faint laugh. I'm not sure that's true. Well, Daniel replied, eyes flicking to the mirror, maybe you're just getting better at pretending. The words hit deeper than she expected. She turned toward the window, hiding the small reaction on her face. She should have brushed off the comment, but something about his tone, not flirtatious, not prying, made her feel seen again, too seen. He drove through morning traffic with calm precision. At a red light, he glanced at her again. Look, I hope I'm not crossing a line. But sometimes you can hear the weight in someone's voice. Claire breathed slowly. You're not crossing a line. It's just been a complicated few months. Daniel nodded without pushing for details. That simple respect surprised her more than any question could have. Halfway to her office, the sky went gray with the promise of rain. The kind of rain that makes everything feel slow and reflective. She watched the clouds and felt a strange question rise inside her. Why am I more comfortable talking to a stranger than my own husband? She didn't say it out loud. She didn't dare. Instead, Daniel spoke softly. Whatever you're carrying, you're not carrying it alone. Even if it feels that way. His words weren't intimate. They weren't crossed boundaries. They were human. Kind. Real. Claire felt her throat tighten. Thank you, she whispered, when the car reached her building. Neither of them moved at first. Not because they were stuck, but because the moment felt suspended. Daniel broke the silence gently. Claire, if you ever need to breathe, even for 5 minutes, you can talk. I drive people all day, but very few actually speak. She nodded without fully understanding why the offer mattered so much. But it did. More than she wanted to admit. She stepped out, closing the door quietly. The ride had lasted only 12 minutes, but it stayed in her chest the entire morning. At lunch, her coworker Emily noticed her distracted expression. You okay? You seem somewhere else. Claire forced a smile. Just tired. Emily tilted her head. Work tired or life tired? Claire hesitated. Maybe both. Emily nodded knowingly, but didn't push. She simply said, sometimes the things that shake us the most aren't the big moments. They're the small ones we don't expect. The words lingered long after Emily walked away. Claire's day dragged on. Meetings, calls, deadlines, none of it felt stable. Her thoughts kept sliding back to the quiet car, the calm voice, the strange comfort she shouldn't have felt. She booked a ride home, her heart tightened when she saw the driver's name, not Daniel, someone else, and she felt disappointed. She sat through the ride home in silence, missing the stability she had felt earlier. It scared her to feel that way. It wasn't right. It wasn't fair. It wasn't what she wanted. But emotions don't follow rules. When she stepped into the house, Ethan greeted her with a rushed hey. While grabbing his laptop bag, another late night, she asked, "Yeah," he said, barely making eye contact. "Big project. I'll probably eat at the office." Her heart sank a little, she nodded. "Okay." He kissed her cheek lightly, barely touching her, and hurried out the door. No conversation, no warmth. No real presence, just routine. She microwaved leftover soup, ate alone at the kitchen table, and told herself she was fine. Everything was fine, but her mind kept drifting to the rides. To the questions. To the quiet comfort. To the possibility that someone else had noticed she was hurting before her own husband had. She hated that feeling. That night, rain poured heavily. Claire couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the soft tapping on the windows, wishing her life felt as gentle as the sound outside. Her phone buzzed. A notification from the rideshare app. "Your driver for tomorrow morning, Daniel." Her chest tightened, not excitement, not fear, something in between, something she didn't want to name. She turned off the phone and tried to sleep, but her thoughts kept circling the same truth she didn't want to face. She felt more connected to a man she barely knew than the one she had promised her life to. Morning came too early. She dressed carefully, not for Daniel, but to feel like someone worth noticing. Someone still visible in her own story. Someone not fading quietly in her marriage. As she walked outside, rain still drizzled lightly. The silver sedan approached, headlights soft and steady. Daniel stopped beside her and lowered the window slightly. "Morning," he said with a warm smile. "Perfect weather for thinking too much." She let out a helpless laugh. "How did you know?" "I didn't," he said. "You just look like someone whose thoughts keep her awake." She froze, startled by how true that felt. She got in. The car smelled like fresh rain and faint citrus. Comforting. Familiar. Dangerous. They drove again, quiet at first, then naturally speaking as if they had known each other longer than 2 short rides. Daniel asked simple questions. Claire answered carefully but honestly. She found herself sharing small details, her love for piano music, her childhood dream of writing, her recent feelings of emotional distance at home, not the marriage problems, not the pain. Just the loneliness between the lines. Daniel listened without interrupting. When they reached a long stretch of road, he finally spoke. "Claire, you don't deserve to feel invisible. Not in your own life." Her breath caught. She stared out the window, blinking fast. His words weren't romantic, they weren't crossing a line, they were simply true, painfully true, and that truth scared her more than anything. As the car slowed near her office, Claire felt a weight settle inside her, heavy and undeniable. She wasn't falling for him, she wasn't planning anything wrong, but she was standing on the edge of something she didn't understand, and she didn't know how far she could lean before losing her balance. What if one honest sentence becomes the moment you can't forget? Claire felt her breath stall as Daniel's words hung in the air. She sat frozen in the back seat, her hand still resting on her bag, unsure whether she wanted to hear what he was about to say, or whether she was afraid of it. He didn't turn around immediately. He kept his hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield as if choosing his words carefully. "Why do we fear honesty the most when we need it the most?" Daniel finally spoke. "Claire, you look like someone who's been alone even when she's not alone. And I don't think anyone deserves to carry that kind of loneliness quietly." The words weren't dramatic. They weren't romantic. They were simply true in a way that pierced deeper than she expected. Claire blinked rapidly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied softly. "It's just, sometimes people forget they matter. I don't want you to forget." She swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wasn't supposed to feel this level of understanding from someone she barely knew. From someone who had only shared 3 rides with her. From someone who wasn't her husband, she whispered, "Thank you, Daniel." He nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to thank me. Just don't pretend you're okay when you're not." That sentence stayed with her long after she stepped out of the car. Inside the office, Claire moved through her day like she was walking underwater. Everything felt distant, her keyboard clicks, her coworkers' voices, the hum of the air conditioner. She kept replaying that moment in the car, the honesty, the softness in his tone. She tried focusing on her tasks, but her mind drifted again and again. Why did his words feel so comforting? Why did they feel dangerous? Why did they feel necessary? During lunch, she sat alone in the break room until Emily joined her. "You look overwhelmed," Emily said gently. Claire forced a smile. "Just tired." Emily leaned closer. "Claire, tired is something you can rest from. This looks like something else." For a moment, Claire considered opening up. Not about Daniel, she wasn't ready to name that, but about the emptiness she felt at home, the distance growing between her and Ethan, the sense that her marriage had become a quiet room with no doors left open, but she swallowed it back. "I'll be fine." Emily didn't believe her, but she didn't push. She simply placed her hand over Claire's and said, "Be honest with yourself, not just with others." Those words stung. When the workday ended, the sky was clear and golden. Claire walked outside, intending to take a different kind of ride, just for space, just for clarity, just to stop herself from depending on a stranger's presence. But when she opened the rideshare app, something unexpected happened. She hesitated. Why was she hesitating? Why did her fingers freeze before booking? Why did her heart whisper a name she didn't want to acknowledge? She shook her head, trying to steady herself. "This is ridiculous," she murmured, but her chest didn't agree. Her hand trembled slightly as she pressed the button. "Driver assigned, Daniel." Her heart tightened, not because she wanted something romantic, but because she wanted to feel understood again. She knew she shouldn't, yet she couldn't deny that something inside her needed the stability his presence gave. The silver sedan pulled up moments later. Claire climbed in slowly, her breath shallow, her emotions scattered. Daniel looked at her through the mirror. "You okay?" She nodded. "Just a long day." He didn't question her. He simply drove. The silence wasn't awkward. It was safe. The kind of silence where you didn't have to pretend. Halfway home, he spoke quietly. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Not because I expect anything. Just because I see you." Claire stared at the window, watching sunlight flicker through passing trees, her eyes burning with unshed emotion. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she whispered. "Because sometimes people walk into your life and you just recognize something familiar," he said. "Something you don't want to see fade." Her heart stumbled at the softness of his words. Not romantic, not forward, just deeply human. Claire exhaled shakily. "Daniel, I'm married." He nodded. "I know." "Then you shouldn't." Claire, he interrupted gently, "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not stepping anywhere I shouldn't. I just care. And caring isn't a crime." She closed her eyes. He was right, and that truth made everything harder. When they reached her street, she didn't get out immediately. The moment felt thick with meaning, unspoken, confusing, heavy. Daniel leaned slightly toward the mirror. "You deserve to feel alive, Claire. Not just present." Her breath caught. She didn't reply. She couldn't. She stepped out of the car and stood on the sidewalk as the sedan drove away, the taillights fading into the distance like a quiet goodbye she wasn't ready for. Inside the house, Ethan was on the couch, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear. He waved at her without pausing his conversation. She waited, hoping he would end the call. He didn't even ask how her day was. He didn't notice the uncertainty in her eyes, didn't notice the trembling in her hands, didn't notice her at all, and that realization hurt more than she expected. Later that night, Claire stepped onto the backyard deck. The air was cool, the sky scattered with stars, the world quiet except for distant traffic. She hugged herself gently and whispered into the dark, "What am I doing?" She didn't want more complications. She didn't want emotions she didn't ask for. She didn't want the confusion growing inside her. She wanted clarity. Stability. Connection. She wanted her marriage to feel like home again, but when she closed her eyes, the only voice she heard was Daniel's, "You deserve to feel alive." Her heart tightened as if pulled in two directions, one by loyalty, one by longing for something she couldn't name. Her phone buzzed. A new notification. Daniel had sent a simple message through the rideshare app. "Claire, can you walk outside for a moment?" Her breath shattered in her chest. Why? What was happening? Why was he nearby? Why did he want to see her? She stepped forward, the cold air brushing against her overwhelmed skin. What if the truth you feared the most was also the one thing that could finally set you free? Claire stood at the edge of her driveway, staring at the empty street, wondering how a single ride, a single moment, had turned her entire world upside down. Everything she thought she understood about love, loyalty, herself, suddenly felt fragile, like glass in unsteady hands. How do you walk toward healing when your heart is still hurting? The morning after her breakdown in Daniel's car felt strangely calm. The storm inside her had quieted, but nothing felt resolved. She sat at the kitchen table, watching sunlight fall across the tiles. The house was silent. Ethan was still away on his work trip. She could finally think without interruptions, and thinking was the part she feared most. Memories kept coming. Ethan's long absences, their drifting conversations, her lonely nights, and that one unexpected ride from Daniel that had brought every buried emotion to the surface. She wasn't proud of how she felt around Daniel, she wasn't proud of how easily she had broken in front of him, but she couldn't lie to herself anymore. Something inside her was changing. She needed clarity. Answers. A direction, and finally, courage. So she reached for her phone, her hands trembled as she typed Ethan a message. "We need to talk when you get home." Simple. Clear. Honest. She hit send before she could lose her nerve, and then she sat back, breathing deeply, feeling a mix of relief and fear. What if the truth you avoided is exactly what the other person needed to hear? Later that afternoon, Claire drove to a quiet lakeside park. She needed air. Space. Distance. As she stepped out of the car, she saw Daniel standing near the water. He looked surprised to see her, but not unhappy. She hesitated before walking toward him. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he replied, equally gentle. "You okay?" "No," she answered honestly. "But I'm trying." Daniel nodded, as if he understood everything she didn't say. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a pause, like both of them were finally ready to breathe after holding everything in for too long. "I didn't mean to make things harder for you," Daniel said after a moment. I wanted you to know you weren't alone." "You didn't make things harder," she whispered. "You made things clearer." Daniel looked at her then, really looked, and in that quiet second, Claire realized why everything felt so complicated, because someone had finally seen her, not as Ethan's wife, not as someone who kept things together, but as a human being with feelings she had buried for years. She wasn't falling for Daniel, but she was waking up, and waking up was dangerous, painful, necessary. "I'm going to talk to Ethan," she said. Daniel nodded. "Good. You deserve honesty. Both of you do." She smiled, a small, grateful smile. He didn't try to stop her, didn't try to promise anything, and somehow, that made her trust him even more. What happens when the moment you feared finally arrives? That evening, Ethan returned. Claire heard his car in the driveway, and every nerve in her body tensed. She stood in the living room, hands clasped tightly, heart hammering. Ethan walked in looking unusually tired, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders heavy. He paused when he saw her, sensing something was wrong. "Claire? What's going on?" She swallowed hard. "We need to talk," she said. He set down his bag slowly, carefully. "About what?" "Us," she whispered. "About everything." For a moment, Ethan didn't move. Then he sat on the couch, rubbing his forehead. "I had a feeling," he murmured. Claire sat across from him, keeping her voice steady. "We've been growing apart for months. Maybe years. And I kept pretending everything was fine because I didn't want to lose what we had." Ethan looked at her, regret softening his expression. "I know I've been distant. Work has been overwhelming. I thought providing more would fix things. It didn't, she said gently. It only made us strangers. Silence again. Heavy this time. Ethan's voice cracked slightly. Is there someone else? The question fell between them like a glass shattering on the floor. Claire's breath caught, not because she felt guilty, she hadn't crossed any lines, but because the question forced her to confront her truth. There's no one else, she said. But someone made me realize how lonely I've been. Ethan closed his eyes, absorbing her words. I never meant to hurt you, he whispered, and I never meant to drift away, she replied. For the first time in a long time, they were honest. Raw. Vulnerable, but honesty didn't solve everything. It only exposed what needed to be faced. I don't know where this leaves us, Ethan admitted. Claire nodded. I don't either. She wasn't angry, he wasn't defensive, this wasn't a fight. It was two people standing at the edge of something fragile, trying to decide whether to rebuild or let go. How do you choose between the life you know and the life you want to grow into? Night deepened outside the windows, but neither of them moved. The conversation continued, quiet, emotional, unresolved. They talked about their past, their disappointments, their fears, their hopes, and the small moments that had faded without them noticing. At one point Ethan whispered, "Do you still love me?" Her heart ached. "I do," she said softly. "But love isn't the problem. It's everything around it." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding but hurting. They weren't enemies, they weren't broken beyond repair, but they were lost, and now, they finally saw it. Yet one question remained, the question neither dared to ask. Were they drifting apart permanently? Or was this the beginning of finding each other again? Claire looked toward the doorway, toward the quiet street outside, because standing somewhere out there was a man who had changed her life simply by offering her a ride home, not because she loved him, not because he tempted her into something wrong, but because he reminded her of something she had forgotten, herself. And just when Claire thought the night held all its surprises, Ethan said one sentence that made her breath stop cold.